talking about. We have to wait till the defendant gets here. That's okay. No, correct me when you think I'm wrong. And then I'll correct you when I'm not. Or I'll go, oops. Or I'll go, drat. All right, Juror 64 has some kind of conflict tomorrow, but my intent is to get through both of them, to just be aware that we're going to go until it's done. All right, Juror 63, please. Good afternoon. We are going to refer to you either as Juror 63 or Miss M. And that's for your privacy. Are you under the age of 18?
No.
Are you a citizen of the United States? Are you a resident of the county other than Cobb County? Do you have a lawsuit pending in Superior Court this week? Have you ever been convicted of a felony and not restored to your civil rights? Your summons, your juror summons, did that come to you in your correct name?
Yes.
Okay. What is your occupation? You can put if you want to put your purse somewhere else. I kind of got started on you real fast, and I started looking, thinking, she's not quite comfortable. Is that better? Okay. Are you married?
No.
Do you have children?
No.
What part of the county do you live in? Are you related by blood or marriage to the defendant, Justin Ross Harris?
No.
Are you related by blood or marriage to Cooper Harris?
No.
Are you related by blood or marriage to Chelsea Doster?
No.
Have you for any reason formed any opinion regarding the guilt or innocence of the defendant?
No.
Have you for any reason expressed any opinion regarding the guilt or innocence of the defendant? Express means to speak out loud.
No.
It's a little bit old-fashioned language. Do you have any prejudice or bias resting on your mind for or against the defendant? Let me break it down. Do you have any prejudice either for or against the defendant?
No.
Do you have any bias in your mind either for or against the defendant? Okay. Is your mind perfectly impartial between the state and the defendant? Thank you. The state will ask you questions first, defense will ask you second, and then they can follow up, each of them.
Good afternoon. I know it's been almost 2 weeks since you were here the first time, so just to refresh your recollection, my name is Jesse Evans. I'm one of the prosecutors on the case, and this is Assistant DA Chuck Boring. He's also a prosecutor on the case, okay? First thing I want to tell you is try not to be nervous. I know it's a little bit disconcerting coming into a courtroom and having to talk to people who are otherwise strangers to you, so if we need to slow down or take a break, or if you misunderstand the question, just tell me and we can take a pause, okay? And understand this too, there's no wrong answers or anything like that. As long as it's a truthful answer, then it's a correct answer. And we're just going to ask you some questions about your questionnaire that you filled out. Is that okay with you? All right, very good. So first thing I want to talk to you about is what happened about 2 weeks ago on Tuesday when you came in and filled out the questionnaire, and we've got a copy of that. Everybody's got a copy in the courtroom. The judge gave you some instructions before you filled out the questionnaire. Do you remember Judge Staley downstairs talking to everybody? Okay. And there are two instructions that I want to focus on She gave them to you orally, and then they were also printed on the second page of the 2-page instructions on the beginning of the questionnaire. The 2 instructions that I want to ask you about as a threshold matter, the first thing is she instructed you guys, hey, because you're prospective jurors on the case, don't discuss the case with anyone. Do you remember that? Okay. And then the other important instruction that Judge Staley gave is, hey, because you're a prospective juror, you can't research this. You're not supposed to watch any media about it or news reports or anything like that. Did you remember that as well? Okay. Did you follow those instructions? Okay, very good. I just wanted to make sure we're asking all our jurors that. I'm not singling you out. We're asking everybody just to make sure that everybody has followed those instructions, which are pretty important to the case. I want to ask you a little bit about your background, if that's all right with you. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about your educational background. I have here that you work in computers and you've got a degree that is associated with that, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about your educational background? Great. And when did you graduate from there?
2000.
All right, great. So that's relatively recently. Congratulations. And then I have down here IT specialist is what you put on your questionnaire, and then you explained it in a little bit more detail when you were just talking to the court. What is it that you do as an IT specialist?
I test bugs and the company I work for, their software.
Okay, test for bugs.
Yeah.
Okay. So just making sure that there's nothing on the system or anything that could do any damage to the hardware or the software. Okay, very good. And how long have you been doing that? 3 years. So just a little bit after your graduation, right? And is that a Cobb County company? In DeKalb. And how long have you lived in Cobb total? Okay. Great. And always in Powder Spring?
No.
You moved around a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. So did you go to a local high school then as well? Great. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of your hobbies. Tell me about the software testing club. Is that required for work, or is that something that you're just voluntarily a part of?
It's volunteer.
Tell me a little bit about that club.
It's an online club. Most of the events are I guess they're based on so it's like interviews, like just like I read articles every now and then.
Okay, great. That's just something you like to do in your spare time because it's related to the industry you work in.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And how long have you been a member of that club? All right. Then in terms of hobbies and stuff, I've got antiquing, hiking, movies, and shopping were what you listed. Is that correct? Are those kind of in that order or is it jumbled up a little bit? In terms of the antiquing, how long have you been involved in that? Okay. So that's kind of a new hobby for you. You ever watch like American Pickers or anything like that? All right. And where do you go do most of your hiking?
Just around there. I guess Chattanooga.
Right.
Not too far.
We're very lucky in Cobb to have a lot of nice places where you can go hike. I just discovered a new park myself. I want to talk to you now about different topics, so we're going to kind of just move through several topics and cover a couple of things. I have the benefit of your questionnaire, so I don't have to ask you every question under the sun. I can just kind of follow up on some of the things that I saw in there that I might have questions about. And the first topic I want to talk to you about is information and where you get your information from. There was a question on there in particular that talked about media contact and news sources that you go to. And you responded that there are three primary news sources you get. One is a radio station, right? 94.5? Okay. And then Channel 2 and CNN. Of those three, which one do you think you are getting most of your news from? Or is it pretty equal? Okay. All right, and then The next topic I want to talk to you about, I wouldn't be surprised with somebody who's working in your field to have a lot of interaction with computers and technology, and that was one of the questions that we focused on, or several questions that we focused on. And we had a whole list of different websites and things like that you go to, different computer technology kind of apps. But in terms of the websites, you listed a few: KSU, Comcast, MTV, Work, Clothing, and CNN. Is that correct? All right, so I want to talk about a couple of those. Tell me, first of all, why the KSU website? I was curious about that. Oh, I see. And what are you getting your master's degree in? All right, wonderful. And what's the ETA on that? How long is it going to take you to do that? 2 years? Great. All right, so that explains KSU. And then Comcast is just the regular Comcast website? Okay. And what are you using MTV for? I know they have mostly reality shows now. When I was growing up, they actually played videos, but they don't do that as much now. Reality shows, okay. And obviously your work website, I don't need to ask you about that. I do want to ask you about some of the computer and phone technology. You have Facebook, Craigslist, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Facebook, I assume, is keep up with family and friends. Is that right? And what about Craigslist? Okay. So you shopping. How about Instagram? I'm sorry, I didn't catch it. Gotcha. And how about Twitter? Mostly celebrities, huh? And what do you use YouTube for primarily? Music? A lot of people have said that. Okay. Next topic I want to talk to you about is the legal system and the criminal justice system. Remember, there were a series of questions that asked you about your interactions and involvement in the criminal justice system. One of the questions, for example, asked you, are there legal TV shows that you watch? And you listed Law and Order, Special Victims Unit, Criminal Minds, American Crime, and Ashley Banfield. Is that correct? Okay. So some of those are fictional shows, obviously, Law and Order, SVU, and Criminal Minds. American Crime, when you mentioned that, I know there's a movie, American Crime. Were you talking about that, or are you talking about the TV series? Okay. I got you. Is it more like a documentary?
It has actors in it.
Actors. Okay. It's not reality. I'm just not familiar. Some of these shows I hear about, and a lot of times I'm learning about new criminal justice shows when jurors come in, because they'll tell me kind of what the new thing is. So, but that's fictional as well. And then Ashley Banfield, you see her on CNN, correct? Okay. And I know she does a legal show there. All right. The criminal justice system, you were asked a question about that, and you checked. Remember that chart where you checked the box and you said some things about your sister. And remember, we're doing things about numbers, so that we're protecting privacy of everybody and things like that. So you don't have to say her name or anything. But there were two responses that you had there about something that happened with your sister. Can you tell me a little bit about that? I see. All right, so she was actually the victim of a crime. Sounds like it was identity fraud or identity theft. Is that correct? And then she got arrested because she missed a court date. Okay. Is there anything about your sister's situation that would lead you to think that you could not be fair and impartial in this case, or can you separate the two? All right. And then you said sister had a lawyer for the defense attorney. Good question. What did she get the lawyer for? Because of the...
Just because she had been just to be on the same side.
I see. Okay. That explains it. Similarly, you indicated You don't know whether it's criminal or not? Are you close to the uncle? Okay. All right, some fact questions that I've got for you. Your grandfather was in law enforcement, is that correct? Was he a local law enforcement officer? Okay. Did he retire from law enforcement? And what did he do with North Carolina police? Okay. One of the questions on here asked if you had any familiarity with Home Depot, and you were quick to note that your mother works for corporate Home Depot. Is that correct? But it doesn't sound like she works at the same place where the defendant worked, the place called the Tree House. Is that correct? Okay, and you wanted to put on here too, there was a question about do you know him or know anyone who knows him. You checked with your mother prior to coming for jury service and filling out this questionnaire. She does not know who he is that correct? And you don't either? Okay. There was a question that was asked here about, is there anyone here who's ever known someone who's been left in a car or anything like that, and you checked the box on one of those, but then you gave an explanation which is fairly self-explanatory, but I want to hear in your own words, what is it about when you were younger that caused you to check that question number 38?
It was just like, he had like a gas station, like, your parents wanted to take the gas.
I see. So is it not like a... Gotcha, just for a second. They run in, they pay for the gas, and come right back out. Makes sense to me. Okay. So, I now want to talk to you about some of the questions that the judge just asked you about. She asked you some statutory questions about fairness and about bias and about things like that. And you gave your responses, and I wrote it down. I'm sure that the defense attorneys did too. And I'd like to follow up on some of those questions with you if I could. But the first thing I want to note is that you were asked if you thought you knew anything about this case, and you believe that you do. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. The facts that you know about this case, did that come from some sort of independent investigation, or did you just hear stuff on the news? Okay. So you'd agree that as you sit here right now, what you think you know about the case came primarily from media sources, and not something that you didn't talk to a witness or a cop or anything like that. Okay. So I want to talk to you about what's required of prospective jurors here to be chosen and seated on the jury. And in fairness to you, it's kind of an awkward situation because you've only had limited instructions from the court so far about how you're going to fill out the questionnaire. Do you agree? So if you were selected as a juror in this case, the judge would explain to you certain very important principles, such as the defendant is presumed to be innocent when he comes to court. And that should be a surprise to you. I mean, you talked about seeing some of these criminal TV shows and even fictional shows will talk about basic principles like that. Have you heard of presumption of innocence before? Yeah. Okay. And then similarly, the judge, at some point, if you were selected as a juror, would give you some detailed instructions about proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I assume that you've heard of that principle before too, right? Okay. So what the law would require is that the defendant's presumed innocent, and he remains presumed innocent until we, the state, the prosecutors, present evidence to prove that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, if we can. And if we prove that he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, you would vote one way. If we fail to do that, you would be required to vote another way and find him not guilty. Does that make sense? And that shouldn't be a surprise to you because those are kind of the basic things that you just hear about just clicking through TV and watching Law and Order and that kind of thing. Another thing that the judge would tell you, for example, is that the burden is always on the state, and that the defendant is not required to prove anything. He didn't have to testify, he didn't have to bring any evidence into court or anything like that, and you have to hold the burden on the state and not on the defendant. Does that make sense to you? So to be a prospective juror in this particular case, what would have to happen is you would have to take an oath, okay? And the oath, just like the oaths that you took this past Tuesday, are a promise that you're going to do something. And the two things that you have to do would be very, very basic things. Come into court and listen to the evidence and base your decision solely on the evidence presented from the witness stand in the courtroom. You understand that? And then base your decision on that evidence. Apply the law that the judge gives you, these instructions that I just touched on with you, and that's how you're supposed to reach your decision in the case, on the evidence in the courtroom and the law that the judge instructs you. Does that make sense to you? All right, so the question I have for you is do you, first of all, understand that would be what's required of you? Okay. And if you were selected as a juror in this case, no matter what you may have heard before you came into court, if you were selected as a juror, could you take that oath and promise to base your decision solely on what's presented in the courtroom and the law that the judge gives you? Okay. So I'm going to get into, some of the things that you put down here as well, and talk a little bit about the questions that the judge asked you. Whatever it is that you may have heard on TV, you would be required almost to kind of leave it at the door and say, all right, we're going to start from scratch here, and I'm going to base my decision solely on what I hear in the courtroom. Is that something you could do? Okay. And, of course, you would get instructions from the court, too, about how you're supposed to evaluate that evidence, and that's called the jury charge. And she would tell you the law that would apply to the case. Would you follow the instructions that the court gives you, too? All right. So I want to go back to your questions. You were asked, form and express your opinion, and you said no to both of those. Then you were asked prejudice and bias, and you first said not really, but then you might have a bias. What did you mean by that? Okay. And how do you think that might make you biased in the case? Sure. Okay. I don't think there's any foreseeable possibility that your mom happening to work for Home Depot would have any impact on her. It should be completely separate. So I hope that eases your mind a little bit about that. Is that the only thing that you had of concern to you when you were talking about the bias question? Okay. And then the other part, the judge asked you a question, do you think you're perfectly impartial in the case? That means, are you open to giving both sides a fair chance and listening to the evidence? And you said, I don't think I'm impartial. What did you mean by that? Why did you respond that way? Okay, all right. And how so? Impartial in favor of one side or another? Or what did you mean by that? Okay. What sort of feelings? Sure. Well, these cases always are sad, and it's not easy to come in and look at this stuff. Even if you're a seasoned veteran within the criminal justice system, so it's perfectly acceptable for somebody to come in and have feelings like that. Despite that, whatever feelings you might have about it, the law would require, if you're going to be a juror on the case, that you would have to say, all right, well, I'm going to try my best. We all bring in our own opinions and thoughts and things, but the law would require that you try your best to base your decision solely on the evidence, as we talked about in the law, and not on any preconceived feelings that you might have at the beginning of the case. Does that make sense to you? Any opinions that you have or feeling of impartiality, do you think that they're so fixed and definite that you couldn't follow those basic instructions that we just talked about? Okay, so you whatever it may be, you could set that aside and listen to the evidence and follow the law. Okay. All right. There's a question on here that we collectively, all of us, both sides, it was a very tricky worded question. It was question number 91, and you even know there is much. I'll show you just because you checked one and you checked both actually, and put an X on one which was just not worded really well. So I'm going to take a shot at trying to clear it up for you so that I fully understand, because you wrote down here, misread the question, and my answer is yes. Question is this: If you're a prospective juror on the case, the law requires that you must base your decision solely on the evidence in the law, like we talked about, okay? And then you would not be concerned with punishment. That's not the responsibility of a jury in a case like this, okay? So the question basically was trying to say, if you understand that your role is only to assess the facts and apply the law and leave sentencing to someone else, like the judge, if we ever get to that point, could you follow that instruction? Yes. Okay, very good. I think that clears it up. I don't think I have any other questions for you at this time, all right?
You have a very soft voice. I'm going to ask you if you would just speak up a little bit for me. I'm a little bit older than Mr. Evans, and I don't hear quite as well as he does. So if anything that I ask you don't understand, just tell me so, okay? All right. I want to know a little bit about this quality assurance. What sort of program is that? Is that in the science fields, or where would that be found? Okay.
I don't do anything. They just test the bugs and then actually bugs to the developers.
Okay.
And they fix the bugs.
I got you. This is more of the business realm of campus. And is that do you have some particular computer knowledge to be able to do that, sort of dealing with software bugs?
Yeah, some knowledge.
Okay. What sort of classes would you have to take to be able to know how to do that? Java, Java. That's a computer program of some sort? Okay. I'm sorry?
They use C#.
C#? Okay. Have you kind of taught yourself along the way on your own, separate and apart from school? Okay. Okay. So on a typical day, you go to an office, I presume, and what do you do? What does that mean when you say you test bugs? To me, that means something totally different than what I'm sure you're talking about. But.
I guess you have to stop the program that and go into like project manager will report bugs that they find in the software.
Something that's not working in the software?
Yeah.
Okay.
They just like go to the customer and they implement it.
Okay.
And I guess they submit bugs to me and then I'll verify the bug and then send it to the development team.
Okay. So you just kind of get on a computer, work the problem that they've told you they're already having, you see what it is, and then you ship it to somebody else and say, hey, in fact, this thing's not working right. Like it's not flipping to the right page, or it's not answering the question I'm supposed to have, or something like that. Okay, all right. And did I understand you have a degree in quality assurance, or you're working your master's quality assurance now?
Yeah.
And your undergraduate degree, what is that in? Information systems, okay. That's the one you got at Georgia Southern, correct? Now, were you from, you're not from that neck of the woods, are you?
No, I'm from this area.
Where are you? Why don't you go to Georgia Southern?
My sister was there, so I just
Okay, how much older than you is she?
she's 2 years old.
Okay, all right. Obviously, she was enjoying it, and that got you to come down there. I'm from that neck of the woods. I know it's a lot hotter and more humid down there than it is here. But a lot of folks seem to, especially if they live here, like to go there instead of staying around here for school. All right. Were you part of any sort of clubs, groups there when you were at Georgia Southern? Okay. Were you somebody who was just what we call a library person? You're just constantly in the books, or did you have some activities you'd like to do on the side to kind of enjoy the college life? Okay. Okay, very good. And obviously it worked because you got your degree and now you're working on a master's. And I think you told us where you were trying to get your master's degree from, but I didn't catch it. Where are you getting that from? Okay. And is that something you go to campus to take classes, or do you ever do that online? Online. Very good. All right. And you've mentioned several different sources of news information as you spoke with about already with Mr. Evans. WSB, I think, is one particular one you mentioned as far as local news. If you were watching local news, would that kind of be the station you would watch, listen to? And do you listen to WSB radio as well, or just television?
Just in television.
All right. Also, you did mention a radio station 94.5, and is that something you listen to throughout the day, or just in the mornings as you're getting ready to go?
Just in the morning.
Okay. And why that particular station?
They have
I gotcha. The morning show host, or just funny folks telling funny stories? Okay. And other than this club that you mentioned, the software testing club, are you part of any sort of group activities at this point in time? Okay. Do you have any group of friends that you go out and do things with on a regular basis? All right. And if y'all are getting together, say on the weekend, what would y'all most likely be doing? Okay. Basically just hanging out. Okay. And then I'm sure, I know we asked the question and I just didn't note it. You said you do not belong to a church. Do you attend a church at all? Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, very good. And if y'all will go into the movies, you and your friends, is this something y'all just kind of do in a spur of the moment? Hey, let's go see this, or y'all kind of plan it out a day or two? Plan it out? And how would you go about, how would that get started? Somebody deciding y'all want to go see a movie?
Just like we know the news that come out, and so I guess a few days before it comes out, we try to work together.
Okay. Figure out where it's playing and then go ahead and get tickets online? Okay. Now, are you young enough, and I know you are, I'm not myself, but are you, in your generation, one of these who communicates mostly by texting with folks as opposed to just calling somebody on the phone? All right. And so if you see a movie that's coming out and you want to go see it, you want to suggest it, would you kind of send it out to your group of friends, say, hey, such and such is playing, how about we go see that? And is that something you do on your phone or on your computer? On your phone, okay. And are you able to do group chats, that sort of thing? Yeah. All right. And any of these folks that you would be hanging out with on a regular basis, are these folks you work with at all, or are they just friends you grew up with? You work with? Okay. And might y'all be talking about that even during the day while you're at work, getting ready to go see a movie? Okay. All right. And are your friends, the ones you typically hang out with, are they all in the same general field that you are, or are they all doing different things? Okay. All right. With your work, are you able to kind of do it on your own time schedule, or do you have to punch a clock 9 to 5 or something of that nature?
We don't have like a set. We have to at least work 8 hours a day.
Okay. Okay.
During a certain time, and then we work over the weekend.
Okay. Does somebody keep track of the actual hours that you work?
I don't think officially, but I think sometimes our boss just kind of like see how we're there.
Would to what we consider a salaried employee, that you get a normal salary and it's not, you're going to pay for this many hours this week and this many hours that week. Yours not salary as long as you just show up and are doing your work. Okay. And when you're doing what you do, is it pretty much you're independent of everybody else? You can just kind of pull some software out and look at it and send it on down the line. In other words, it doesn't involve you having to get together with other people. Is that correct? Do you like that? Do you prefer working independently, or do you prefer working with a group of folks? You do? Okay. Have you considered or looked into other occupations where you can do more of a group project sort of thing? All right. And is there anything particular that you'd be interested in doing, if you could?
Go somewhere else where I guess I
More of a QA people? Okay. And kind of bouncing ideas off of each other and whatnot? Are you the only QA person at the place where you work? I gotcha. Now, what are the other people doing, your friends that you'd be hanging out with? What are they doing while they're there? Okay. Okay. Are there any computer programmers in there? Okay. There are some at the place, but not folks you're real close to. Okay. Now, you mentioned that Ashby Banfield, particularly a person you mentioned that you would watch her show. Why is it that you would particularly be watching her show?
We have keys in our office at work. It's just to see that I think she comes on at 12.
I gotcha. She's the show that's on when you're in front of that TV. I gotcha. So it's not necessarily a choice you're making, it's just that's what's on. Okay. And do you have any idea what sort of things she talks about? Do you plug into it enough to even listen to what she's saying about particular topics?
This is just different, like depending on what happened that day.
Or we should be talking about like celebrity gossip or political news or computer news or legal news or what?
I think that we should be talking about presidential campaign.
Okay. Ever watch her to the point where she's saying something and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't believe what she believes. She's getting on my nerves. Anything like that? Right. But do you pay attention to it enough to kind of decide, gosh, I wish we could have a different channel because I don't even like listen to her, or, you know, I really like what she has to say. She's really enjoyable. Okay. Okay. Are you eating lunch basically when this is going on? Okay. I got you. And you're talking with your friends and whatnot, I presume. Fair enough. In the American Crime, I think you indicated that's not a reality show, and they're not talking about real cases. They're just kind of talking about recreations of a crime that they've imagined. Is that what it is? It has who? Oh, a famous actress. Okay. Okay. You just don't know her name. Okay. You know, would you consider yourself a pretty computer-savvy person? Okay. And when you're not at work, and you're just kind of hanging out at home, how much of that time would you normally be spending online?
It's also online. I would work from home.
Okay. Okay. When you're not working, though, would you be on a computer looking up stuff and whatnot, or you try to leave it alone? You're on it. Okay. Now, I think we asked one of these questions, which may have been kind of odd sort of question, but you answered it very honestly for us. Having met somebody online on Match.com, is that correct? And is that what led you to go on to Match.com and look for somebody that way? Okay. Simpler way to meet somebody without having to go out and about and look for somebody? Okay. And apparently that was successful, at least for a short period of time. Met somebody and y'all went out for a while, correct? And is this somebody that you're still seeing now? Okay, all right. But based on that experience, is it maybe something you might do again? Okay. Fits your personality, is that fair to say? Okay. Are there any other sort of online places that you would be looking that you might run across somebody you think, hey, that might be somebody I'd be interested in talking to a little bit more? And what would that be? Well, it could be similar. It might be something totally different. It might be some group chat place that you like to go to and talk to people. Okay, Cupid. Okay. I think I've heard of that. All right. And is that where you're just kind of chatting online and people can kind of join in the conversation and kind of ask you, hey, I'm interested in this, or? Okay. Okay, so you kind of have a profile and people look for your profile. Okay. All right. Any other sort of online resources that you would use to try to, even just, not necessarily looking for a date, but just kind of looking for people to talk to? No? Okay. Are you familiar with I think we had them in our list here, something called Kik, K-I-K, and Scout? All right. And as far as Kik goes, is that something you've ever used or been on? And tell me kind of, how does it work differently from one of these, Match.com or OkCupid?
You already know the person, so you can't come through you can talk to each other.
Okay. It's just a platform that y'all can chat back and forth with each other? Okay. And have you ever met somebody on there that you might be chatting to and talking with? Okay. And would that be somebody that you knew before meeting them on Kik, or someone that you would have met on Kik?
I met them before.
Okay. All right. And what would be the purpose of using Kik as opposed to just using your phone?
Because you don't have to give them instructions.
Okay. A little more anonymity to it? Okay. Anything about using those online resources that seems unusual to you, or is it pretty normal for you in your background? Okay. Very good. And how do you, if you're talking to somebody online there, is there a profile or something you can kind of look them up, kind of see who it is you're talking to? I got you. Sure. You wouldn't just go anonymously looking for somebody. I got you. All right. Now, you mentioned something interesting there when you said you're concerned about having bias or prejudice, might be concerned about something happening to your mom. She works at Home Depot. What does your mom do for Home Depot? Okay. Do you know where her office is? Okay. And did you have anything in mind that you were thinking that somehow it might affect your mom while you're serving as a juror? Okay. And what were you thinking might be a way she could be affected by it? Okay. And what would make you think they might fire her? sorry?
I'm not sure. I just, because looking for worse section, I being involved, because I was involved.
Okay. Well, obviously there's a connection there in your mind. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what that is. Do you think maybe that the folks at Home Depot might not want one of their employees' children involved with this case?
Yeah.
Okay. Why is that? Why would you think that? That's okay.
I just like in my mind, like that's where I go.
Okay. Sure. And perfectly understandable. Obviously, you don't want somebody else to be affected, but especially something so arbitrary like that. I'm just trying, has your mom said anything about this case to you by any chance? Okay. And what is the, obviously there's some connection in your mind of your mom working at Home Depot to this case, and what is that connection?
Like a worry thing.
Okay.
It's like a real thing that just I worry.
Okay. All right. Well, if your mom worked for IBM, would you have that same concern? I'm sorry? Okay. Well, what is it about Home Depot that makes you have that concern? Okay. All right. That's what I'm getting at. Trying to figure out what information you've got in your mind that you're making that connection. So you believe that Mr. Harris worked at Home Depot? All right. And do you have any other information that you think you may know about where he worked or what he did? No? Okay. And you're thinking he worked at Home Depot, is that because of something you've read in the paper or heard on TV or something of that nature? Okay. All right. And well, this is a good time to just kind of ask, let's just work out exactly all the details that you may have heard about this case. Of course, maybe none of them are true. Who knows? But it's really important because that's kind of what you know coming in here. Tell me what you know that you've heard reported about this case. Okay. Okay. Is that it? Okay. And did you, prior to the judge reading the indictment a couple weeks ago tomorrow, did you have any idea about there being an arrest being made in the case? Okay. Did you hear anything about what the charges were? Okay. All right. And this is something you heard back when it first occurred, back in June of 2014? Have you kind of heard some follow-up reports about it over the past couple of years? I got you. Very good. And have you heard any of your friends been talking about it? Okay. And you say randomly. I know sometimes people looking on Facebook, somebody might just post something on Facebook that has something about this. Do you remember seeing anything like that on Facebook? Okay. And when you say randomly, then what are you talking about? I got you. It might be reporting on the status or something like that. Okay. Anything specifically you remember that was reported any of these other times, other than the son was left in the car and the gentleman worked for Home Depot? Do you remember any response that you had when you heard the story when it first happened? Just sad. Now, you don't have any children yourself, correct? And do you remember any reports about the dad, how he was reacting to all this? No. How about the mom? Do you remember hearing anything about the mom? No. And it's fair to say that you've not, based on what little bit you've heard about it, you've not made any sort of opinion about what happened or didn't happen in the case. Is that fair to say? All right. And, there are some people in the world that are very skeptical of other people, or whenever they hear anything. Every time information's out there, they go look it up, research it, check it out, that sort of thing. There's other people who just kind of, wow, that's amazing. And they just kind of accept it at face value. Are you the type who tends to be more skeptical of folks, or are you the type who tends to be more accepting of people? Accepting. Okay. And there's also some folks who are very detail-oriented, who the big picture people say, well, just kind of tell me what's going on. I don't need to know all the details. And other people say, well, the big picture isn't all that important unless I know all the details. Are you more of a big picture person or more of a detail person? Detail? Okay. Why is that? Okay. Okay. And how so?
Just with following steps.
I'm sorry.
So just creating steps with creating bugs and testing new feature requests to the software.
Okay. All right. You mentioned an uncle that is a lawyer, and where does he live? Virginia. Okay. Do you have any idea what sort of law he practices? Okay. Any idea what he does on a daily basis? Okay. Do you know if he owns his own practice or if he works for somebody else? Okay. How often do you see him? Okay. And where would you see him?
Usually with my
With your Nana?
yeah,
Okay. Okay. Would y'all go up there to see him?
yeah, or if you would meet at the family center.
Okay. You ever talk to him at all about what he does on a daily basis? Okay. And have you ever, I'm just trying to figure out how it is that you know he's an attorney. Is this family talk that he's an attorney?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So as you're sitting here today, you don't know much about, well, you don't know anything about the case really, other than the indictment and the charges. And although obviously it's sad because the child has died, do you believe you'd be able to listen to the evidence in the case and fairly determine whether or not Ross had anything to do with that? Okay. And is there, if you were serving as a juror, and it's possible because of your age, you might be the youngest person on the jury. I don't know that, but it's possible. Do you think you're the type who could stand your ground and stand up if everybody else were against what you thought was going on in the case? And even though you're a very quiet personality, doesn't mean you're not a strong personality. Do you have any concerns about being able to make your own decision regardless of what everybody else may be saying? All right, very good. And would it be pretty fair to say you're the type of person who gets along with most everybody? Okay. And so as you sit here, basically as Mr. Evans was talking earlier, you know what presumption of innocence is, and you presume that Mr. Harris is innocent at this point in time, correct? And that presumption stays with you and may never change, correct? Very good. All right. And there may be, in this case, because there's multiple charges, you may make decisions about some charges that's different on the other charges, correct? Would you be comfortable doing that? All right. Very good. All right. Well, I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I'm going to excuse you now. You can go with Mr. Lester. He'll give you your next directions. And if y'all could bring 64 as soon as you can. And if y'all can talk faster. I'm just saying. I will.
I'll do the best I can.
I'll do the best I can do. I thought you did very good. You're welcome. Very much. Good afternoon. We're going to refer to you as either Juror 64 or Miss S. And I have questions to ask you. Are you under the age of 18? Are you a citizen of the United States?
Yes.
Do you reside in a county other than Cobb County?
No.
Do you have a lawsuit pending in Superior Court this week? Have you ever been convicted of a felony and your rights not restored? And is your summons correct for your name?
Yes.
Okay. What is your occupation?
Self-employed.
What kind of self-employment?
I do project work mostly with events and marketing and customer experience.
Are you married? Do you have children? What part of the county do you live in?
Fine.
Are you related by blood or marriage to the defendant in the case, Justin Ross Harris? Are you related by blood or marriage to Cooper Harris? Are you related by blood or marriage to Chelsea Doster? Have you, for any reason, formed any opinion regarding the guilt or innocence of the defendant? Have you, for any reason, expressed any opinion regarding the guilt or innocence of the defendant? Verbally said something?
Not since I've known about this jury summons.
Before?
I'm sure I did. It was discussed.
Okay. Do you have any prejudice or bias resting on your mind for or against the defendant?
Not the defendant, but the situation.
Is your mind perfectly impartial between the state and the accused?
I have opinions that are very strong.
So would that affect your...
Question a different way.
Huh?
Can you ask that question a little differently?
Well, would your opinions that are strong affect your ability to be impartial between the parties?
And if you want me to explain more, I will. But I'll just say, I don't think so. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I believe so, but I'm not.
Okay. All right. The state can ask questions first, the defense, and then follow up if they care to. Thank you.
We were with you so briefly Tuesday morning. It's been almost 2 weeks now. I'm Jesse Evans with the Cobb DA's office, and this is Assistant DA Chuck Boring. We're the prosecutors assigned to the case. And we just have a few questions for you about some of the things you just told the court, as well as some things that are on your questionnaire as well. So I want to get to those. But before I do that, I want to ask you a couple of questions that you've already kind of touched on in one of your responses, and questions regarding some of the instructions that the court gave you this past week when we first came in. Do you recall, for example, the judge telling you both orally and in writing as well as on the questionnaire that you're not to discuss the case with anyone? Okay. And similarly, the court told you both orally and in writing, don't do any independent research or anything because you're now a prospective juror on the case. You recall that as well?
Yes.
I think you've already answered that question, that you've followed those instructions. You haven't talked about it or done any research since you realized this past, almost 2 Tuesdays ago, that you are a prospective juror on the case. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the questions here. The purpose of the questionnaire is just so we can kind of hone in on topics and not have to ask you every question under the sun, but really sort of get into some of the responses that you have here. And I have noted here that you're not initially from Cobb. You came from another state. Is that correct?
Correct.
And we're using numbers so we can kind of protect your privacy and stuff. We don't mean anything by it. It's just easier that way. Where did you come from? Where are you from?
Most recently, I've lived in other parts of Atlanta.
Okay.
I moved to Atlanta about 6 years ago from Manhattan.
Okay.
Before that, I was in Arizona, and I grew up in North Carolina.
All right. So North Carolina is where you grew up.
Correct.
All right. And were you doing the same type of work in Manhattan that you're doing down here?
Part of the time, I was in public relations.
Okay.
For a long time. It was all maybe under the same large umbrella.
All right. I want to ask you a little bit about the employment that you mentioned. And you gave a little bit of a description to the court, and I wrote down projects, events. What do you mean by that? What is it that you do like on a daily basis?
At the moment, it's totally easy choice for me. I am typically hired. It might be a year-long contract. It's typically 3 or 4 months, 6 months. It just depends. Sometimes a hotel will hire me to come because I have a big hotel background.
Okay.
To come in and create a new guest experience.
Okay.
So we don't like the way check-in is working. Our marketing isn't strong enough. Come fix this. So I don't fix problems typically. The project I'm in the midst of right now that just launched on this past Friday is creating a large, it's a show house where we're dealing with contractors and designers and their teams and landscapers and architects and then people from all over the Southeast. Just opened on Friday and it's open for a month, and we'll have about 3,000 people come through over the next however many days.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that's a big idea about it. So if you probably couldn't read part of my handwriting because I was shaking so hard that day.
Sure.
It's a big deal.
I know.
I mean, for my personal life, I guess it's a big deal to some also. But
And I promise we'll get to that question too. There was a specific question about hardships going on in your life, and as you might imagine, everybody has something going on, and sometimes it's bigger than others. But if you bear with me, I promise we'll give you an opportunity to explain a little more on that. But let me get some background information on you first, if I could. I noticed that you have a college degree that's a little bit different, it sounds like, from what you're involved in now. Is that accurate?
Just not my father.
And which is perfectly fine. Everybody has different backgrounds and things like that. Did you think that you might want to do something different when you were in college from what you're doing now?
Yes.
Okay. And did you work in the journalism profession at all?
Yes.
Okay. How long did you do that?
It's been back and forth because in the journalism school where I attended school, advertising was also a part of that.
Okay.
So I've done writing and public relations and advertising and on air stuff.
Okay. All right. So you've done a lot of that then. We're going to talk topics again. One of the questions we had was, where do you get your information from? And what news sources do you go to? And you listed quite a bit of them. It looks like you're a bit of a newsie, so to speak. Is that because of your background, or are you just very interested in current events and what's going on?
I'm just interested in what's going on.
Okay. And of the ones that you listed, we've got Morning Joe, MSNBC, CBS, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, CNN, Fox. Is there one that you go to more often than not that you rely on, or do you go pretty equally to all of them?
Because of daily habits, probably Morning Joe and CBS this morning because it's on when I'm getting ready.
Okay.
Okay. And I flip back and forth so I don't have to listen to commercials.
Gotcha. Switching to the topic of legal interests and legal things, your involvement with the criminal justice system. The legal shows that you identified are CSI, Law and Order, and Motive, and Blacklist, which is one of my favorites. Is that correct? Those are all fiction shows, correct? We have to ask some questions now these days. Some jurors come in and they watch CSI and things like that, and they say, well, I thought that's really how the criminal justice system worked. I doesn't assume. You tell me, can you separate the distinctions between the realities of the criminal justice system versus what you see on, say, CSI and Law and Order? Okay. No, so you don't think that it's in any way impacted your expectations regarding the criminal justice system? You have prior jury service, is that correct? And was that here in Cobb County or elsewhere? How long ago?
12 years ago.
Okay. And where was that?
Manhattan.
I note here that it was a criminal case and you were not the foreperson, correct?
Correct. Actually, the criminal case was, and my apologies if I'm mixing up criminal and non-criminal, it's in Tucson,
Okay.
in Pima County. And that was, I think I wrote on there on the matters to say about what type of case it was. It sounds absolutely horrible. I realize this, but when that happened, I do not remember what the case was.
Okay. Yeah, you actually put on here, I don't remember. So you actually served it on 2 times then, 2 separate occasions then? Okay. What about...
New York may have ended early for some reason.
All right. Maybe a plea or something happened. All right. But you did reach a verdict on the other case then? Okay. And what was the type of case? What type of charge was it? Do you remember?
Okay.
And is there anything about that experience that you think might impact your ability to be fair and impartial in this case? You mentioned here, staying on that topic, that you know 3 Atlanta police officers and have worked with the district attorney and defense attorney on a prior occasion. Is that correct?
I know 3 police officers very well. I'll give it more now.
Okay. Is this part of the project that you're working on? So the event that the 3,000 people are coming to, that's going to be something that's going to be in downtown Atlanta?
No, it's just in a residential street in Buckhead.
Really? Okay. Very interesting. And these 3 officers, is this a part-time job that they're doing? Or?
They come in and provide security and traffic control.
Okay. And what about working with the DA and defense attorney? You check that box as well.
But that was a mistake. I don't think I have it all. I've been in Atlanta.
Okay. Have you done that in the past in some way, shape, or form?
In Cobb County?
No, just anywhere.
My ex-husband is an attorney, so yes.
All right. What type of practice did your ex have?
Primarily construction and labor.
No criminal then.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to get into some of the questions that the court just asked you about impartiality. Those questions were also covered in a number of areas in the questionnaire as well. And the first thing I want to note is that you've indicated and were asked, do you think that you know anything about the case? And you said that was the case. Is that correct? You correct me if I'm wrong. The things that you think you know about the case, they come from the media? Is that correct?
Media and discussions with friends.
Gotcha. You haven't done any independent investigation, like gone out to any crime scenes or talked to any police officers that may be involved or anything like that? Okay. So they're all from outside sources. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to discuss with you a little bit about the law, and you've had prior jury service, so you sort of know how the process works. I assume some of our jurors have come in, never been called to court, never served as a juror before. And one of the things that you may remember from your prior experience with the DUI trial is that when it comes to evaluating the evidence, the judge gives you very important legal instructions on how a case is to be judged. Do you remember that part of the trial by chance?
Yes.
Okay. And some of the important things that the court would talk to you about are things that we all know just from watching TV and understanding how the American criminal justice system works, such as the defendant is presumed innocent at the beginning of the case. That presumption remains with the defendant until we, the prosecutors, carry evidence into the courtroom. And if we can, prove our case beyond a reasonable doubt. Of course, if we do, you would vote one way. If we don't, you would be required to vote another way and find the defendant not guilty. I'll sound kind of familiar to you, I would assume, from your prior service. Another important principle would be that the defendant bears no burden at all. The burden's always on the state. So we either have to carry the burden of proving his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, or if we can't, then you would have certain obligations. And he does not have to prove a thing. The burden always stays on the state. Do you understand those kind of basic principles? Okay, so if you were selected as a juror in this case, you would be required to take an oath. And the oath would require that you do 2 basic things. Those 2 basic things are as follows. Listen to the evidence presented in the courtroom and base your decision solely on that evidence, and apply the law that the judge gives you to the evidence and nothing else. Does that make sense to you? If you were selected as a juror in this case, I'll just get right down to it. Could you follow that oath and those instructions and base your decision on the evidence presented in the courtroom and the law that the judge gives you, and those 2 things alone? Okay. And that's all we can ask, is just that you make your best effort. But to say it another way, I'm going to get into what your kind of opinions and thoughts are on the case in just a minute, and you put some of those on your questionnaire. The question is, whatever those opinions or thoughts there may be, that haven't come from the courtroom, you haven't heard any evidence yet, correct? Okay. Those opinions and thoughts that you might have on the case, therefore, came from, we call them extrajudicial sources. They came from the media, they came from water cooler talk, so to speak. Are any of those opinions so fixed, so rigid, so determined, that you would be unable, and I'm careful with my word there, unable to listen to the evidence in this courtroom and base your decision on that evidence and the law that the judge gives you?
My opinion in one area is probably that's fine.
Okay, and in what area is that?
Our responsibility.
And I noted some of your in some of these responses in your questionnaire that you mentioned some things and wrote some things out there. I want to say this too. There are absolutely no wrong answers as long as it's a truthful answer. And I appreciate the fact that we don't know you yet. We're learning a little bit about you during this process, and just like we're learning about all of the other jurors here, everybody comes into the courtroom with their own thoughts about certain things, and everybody comes in with their own opinions and their own, bases for why they think a certain way. We certainly aren't asking that anyone come into the courtroom and ignore those things. But all that's required under the law is that you, despite those things, understand that you would be required to base your decision not on whatever those opinions are, but rather the evidence presented in the courtroom and the law that the judge gives you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. In understanding that, is there any opinion you have that is just so fixed, that is just so determined, as we're sitting here talking, that you don't think you would be capable of listening to the evidence and applying the law?
I will certainly listen to the evidence.
Okay. And what about applying the law that the judge gives you?
Well, I don't think an option is to apply the law.
That's exactly right. Yeah, she would give you the instructions, and those would be sort of, it's like instructions for putting something together that you go and that's how you put the case together in terms of your verdict, is by following the instructions that she gave you, just like you followed the instructions that were given to you this past Tuesday. Does that make sense? Okay. And do you think you could do that?
Unfortunately, we know enough to know what is most likely going to be presented. So with what's probably going to be presented,
sure,
it's just fine.
I think there's
some for sure, but we don't know.
All that the law requires is that you keep an open mind, because it hasn't been presented yet. And you may think that you know a lot of things. A lot of jurors may think that they know a lot of things. They may also be surprised at some of the things that are actually presented in the case. There's certainly an awful lot from both sides that might be a little different than what's been reported, which is why we require that our jurors agree that they keep an open mind and listen to the evidence and listen to the law. Is that going to be an issue for you, or do you think you can be open to doing both of those things?
I like to think I can always be open-minded, and of course, do what the judge asks.
All right, very good. That's all that we can ask of you now. Since we've talked about it, and it's fair game for the defense, what is it that you feel so strongly about right now that at least gave you pause for the questionnaire? I think you've explained it with your oral answers, but in terms of the questionnaire, there were some questions you didn't check, or you wrote a short explanation. What is it that you're thinking about that led you to kind of hold off on those answers?
When it comes to the defense, that kind of...
Sure. On what your opinion is and why it is that you answered the way that you did.
I asked the problem.
Yes.
Let's get over to all the questions.
So, for example, you were asked, have you formed an opinion? You said probably. That was one of the questions the judge just asked you. What is an opinion that you probably formed?
The child died in a car.
Sure.
That's not an opinion. And whether it was A, B, or C, I cannot, even the most innocent, so let's say C is the most innocent, I cannot not find a wicked fault for that.
Sure.
Don't do that.
One of the things that the judge just asked you earlier is if you've expressed that opinion, and you said, well, prior to Tuesday, you may have discussed that with someone. Who do you think you've discussed that with in the past?
Friends.
Okay.
Most of my friends have children that age.
Right.
one set of criteria, the other friends are all for the cause. But, yeah, it's just, I can't help but listen to them also.
Sure. The judge asked you a second question, do you have any prejudice or bias? And I think you were careful about your response. Well, you don't have any prejudice personally against the defendant, and you don't know the defendant correctly, correct? But it's the situation that you identified as being something you're concerned about. Is that more a general concern then? It's not like a defendant-specific concern for that question?
It's absolutely general.
Okay.
I can get more detail if you want.
And then the impartiality question, are you perfectly impartial between the state and the defendant? What was your response to that question?
I hope so.
Okay. And that's all we can ask is that you come in with an open mind. In this particular case, all you'd be required to do is listen to the evidence and apply the law. You can do those two things? All right. Thank you, ma'am. I think that's all I have for you right now.
Good afternoon. Almost done for the day. Mr. Evans has said many times to you, that's all we can ask, is that you just kind of hope to do your best and try to do your best. And as you said, you hope so. You set these things aside. But that probably, as you hear that probably raises a question in your mind, well, how can that possibly be all we can ask? Shouldn't we have actually impartial jurors sitting here? And I think you're being very honest and open with us, and we appreciate that, and that's why we're doing this one at a time. It takes a lot longer, but it's just so we can find out exactly where people stand. And as Mr. Evans said, there's no wrong answers. They're your opinions and where you are. So I want you to feel absolutely free to tell us whatever's on your mind. It's not going to offend anybody. It's not going to upset anybody. This is real important to make sure we actually get fair and impartial jurors, okay? I understood you to say the opinion that you have that even the most innocent person under these circumstances, I understood you were talking about where a child has died. I cannot help but find horrific fault with that. Am I saying that correctly? All right. And based on what you said in your questionnaire, there's multiple times that you mentioned to us that it's being a parent, being responsible for your children, that this simply is an unacceptable outcome and that a child has died, correct?
Under these circumstances, yes.
All right, very good. And when you say under these circumstances, make sure we're on the same page. What do you mean by that? Under what circumstances are you thinking that this is?
Well, it's not an illness. It's not in a hospital. It's in a car.
Okay. Is that it? Just because it's in a car? Or is there anything else?
Well, I'm going to skip it to facts. That would be the reason it's not exactly what's in a car.
Okay. When you say the facts, you're talking about what you've heard reported somewhere and what your friends have told you.
Right.
Is that correct? All right. And as regards, it would be fair to say that if the state brings forth evidence that this child did in fact die in a car, that fact alone is going to lead you to enforce this opinion that if that's in fact what happened, then I can't even consider finding Mr. Harris not guilty. Okay. Do you think, as you sit here right now, would it be fair to say, can you even presume that he's not guilty right now, given what you've heard? I appreciate that. Is that a no? You cannot? Okay. And that's okay. That's all right. I don't want you to feel bad by feeling that. That's your feeling, okay? Do you feel like that you would put some burden upon the defense to try to give you some information to somehow eliminate this opinion that you have at this point in time? Or do you even think it's possible that we could even do that? You said in one of the questions,
Brian, we'll do 57 last, not first.
asked about hearing about the case. You said not only did Cooper die, but it was on purpose. You recall writing that? And that's part of your opinion as you sit here today, correct? That you believe it was done on purpose.
I think that's at the time, it was last Tuesday.
Okay. Or a week ago, last Tuesday.
That's what I understood. That's what I believe.
Okay. And that comes from what you've heard reported and what your friends have told you, correct? All right. And do you remember hearing about this back when it originally happened? All right.
We really hadn't discussed this then. It's been a while.
Okay.
One that one remembers.
How do you recall how you heard it reported or where you heard it reported?
I don't watch a lot of local news, so I probably heard about it first from someone else.
Okay.
And then check it out. Those long things. That's my typical.
I got you. Okay. And do you remember if you went to check it out, do you remember where you would have gone to check it out? As in go online and research it or actually? Okay. Do you remember reading any particular articles about it? About what happened?
I remember reading about it, but I can't name what articles.
Okay. That's fine. For some reason, you've got it in your opinion that this was done on purpose. And if it comes from what you've heard, I'm just trying to figure out what you may have heard that led you to that conclusion. And it could just be somebody else telling you that, for all I know.
I remember what the reports were. It was that there was another woman involved, and didn't want to be a father anymore, and thought being a father was a pain or something, and came out, drove from one place to another place. This is how it came across and what we discussed at the time.
Okay.
I had not thought about that until the last couple of weeks.
Okay. And obviously you've not talked to anybody else about this since you were here and filled out the form. And so that opinion you have is obviously something you had before you got here.
And I think I probably did a little, or paid more attention because it's kind of, I remember it's kind of close to where I live.
Okay.
Geographically, you notice.
Sure. Are you familiar with that area where the Home Depot headquarters is in Paces Ferry and Cumberland Parkway? Okay. You ever eat at the Chick-fil-A that's right there, just down from the big intersection there?
Never, maybe if I'm not very driver.
Okay. Fair enough.
I'm one Atlanta.
Does your work cause you to have to travel in the mornings during the rush hour in that area?
Sometimes.
All right. And do you drive by yourself somewhere? You carpool with other people, or how do you get? All right. All right. And as regards this opinion that you have, the words that Mr. Evans used, he said, would you be unable to set that aside? And that is a very particular word, and it's a very strong word. And to be unable to set it aside, obviously the opposite of that is you're able to set it aside. And so we need to find people that if they do have opinions, that they can tell us, I am able to set that aside. Not that I hope to, not that I want to try to, not that I'm going to do my best, but trying to find other people who actually can set this aside, okay? And as you think about it, and as you think about the circumstances you've understood them to be, and I think as you just answered me a while ago, you just, let me use the word I think that you used, well, I can't find it in my notes. I'm on the wrong page. That'll explain it. I cannot consider anything that would lead you to change that opinion. Is that a fair statement as you sit here now?
Well, say I thought about, could this have been over the past weeks?
Sure, absolutely.
Could this answer something? But even if it was where my ABC thing came from, even if it were, you can't do it. You can't have access. You have stressed out, whatever the reason might be.
Sure. And so is it fair to say then, given that understanding, that being asked to impartially listen to the evidence in this case to see if you can even consider a not guilty verdict and a guilty verdict, let me ask you this way. Do you think it would be fair for someone with your mindset to be sitting and listening into a case of this nature, given what you know about yourself and your fixed opinion about this?
What I feel and what I want to be are two different things.
Okay, understandable.
There's really nothing else, but planet where I feel this black and white.
Okay.
I can't, I thought about it in the last weeks, I can't go to you and say that it's okay.
The question is, can you even consider that Mr. Harris is not criminally responsible in this matter?
I do my very best to start that way.
What's it going to take when you do your very best to go from very best to saying, yes, I can take that oath and actually set that aside? Can you think of anything that would do that?
That would take an active role on my part.
Okay. And that you're exactly right. And that's exactly why you're here. Do you know of anything that can will yourself to change your opinion and put yourself in that position so you can say, yes, I'm perfectly impartial? Sorry? You don't know. Okay. Well, when the question was said about an oath, and you made a comment, well, if it's an oath, that's what I have to do. Unfortunately, that's not true. You can do whatever you want to do. Even if you take an oath, you don't have to do what you're supposed to do. We understand, obviously, you want to do exactly the right thing. And you want to be able to be a fair and impartial juror, if at all possible. I presume that's where you want to be. But the bottom line is, only you know if you're able to raise your hand and say, yes, I'll take that oath. And you can choose not to. And that's up to you. You can tell us, no, I can't in my own good conscience say that I can be fair and impartial and take that oath. I can't make that for you. The judge can't make that for you. The state can't. None of us can answer that for you other than you. And I think maybe one way to look at it may be this. If you are in a position to say, not that I'm going to try to do my best, but I know that I can set aside whatever I've heard before. I know I can set aside whatever opinion I've had before. I know without a doubt that I can be impartial toward Mr. Harris and consider him not guilty, presume not guilty, and listen to the evidence. Or you may be one, as many are, who say, I just don't know that I can do that.
I don't think you can know until you're in the situation.
Okay.
Where I'm sitting right now, I don't know that.
Okay. You can't say that you could do that. Okay. All right. And you indicated on one of the questions I asked if you had watched any of the proceedings, and it looks like you had indicated that you had watched some of the proceedings on television or internet. Do you remember what that was by chance?
I haven't watched proceedings, but
Okay.
you might probably something on a local news station
Okay.
some video.
I got you. Okay. So not watching any of the court proceedings or anything like that, not specifically. Okay.
And that was back when we don't have it.
Okay. Fair enough. And the three Atlanta PD officers you're working with, they're providing security for an event. Is that right? Okay. And have you had any reason to be talking to them about this case? Okay.
Well, we'll say this. The only thing is I have so many people involved in this project that I've had to come up with contingency plans because I had to be gone the next day.
Sure,
and
sure.
I'm sure some assumptions have been made. I said I have a jury duty in the story.
Okay.
But
Let me talk just a little bit about that situation, because obviously that sounds like it's pretty important in your life, this project. Something you've been working on for how long now? It's December? Okay. And what is it exactly? I just didn't quite catch what it is.
Most people are familiar with this sort of thing. It's easy enough to understand.
Okay, good.
So we've got 30 interior designers, which makes it sound so fluffy, I know, who have all come in and decorated a different room in a 25,000 square foot spec house.
Large place. Okay.
I did 2 houses. So, and they're the top design talent in the Southeast.
Okay.
And it's something that happens every year. It's the benefit for Safe Kids, Georgia, and Choa, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta.
Sure.
And my job is to produce it. So we do everything to get the house built in a ridiculous amount of time, to all the logistics and operations, to managing and handling 30 designers.
Right, well, that's no small task.
28 moving trucks in and out in 4 days.
Okay.
To install everyone and all the events that go with it. Managing all the volunteers. Believe it or not, I don't have staff.
Okay. And I understand that's already started as of last week?
The opening night party was Friday night.
Was Friday night, okay. So everything's in place now, is that right? Or is it still coming and going?
Every weekend is different.
Okay.
So Thursdays through Sundays.
So there's different shows, each shows is showings, I guess is a better word.
Absolutely. So if you buy tickets,
I got you.
come in, and then you got book signings and tours and
Okay.
go to Scott's and a partnership with ADAC, which is another benefit for CHOA.
Okay.
Just lots of events that go on with it.
All right. And who's is there a corporate sponsor for this totally?
Atlanta Home Lifestyles magazine.
Atlanta Home Lifestyle Magazine?
Homes and Lifestyles.
Okay. And have they actually, have they hired you to be the project manager of this? Is that how it worked? Okay. Given all that's going on with that, do you think your mind might be, if you were sitting here in the jury box, would you be kind of, I know we're always thinking about lots of things, but would you be able to give undivided attention as you sit here? Do you think this project that's going on out there may divide up some of your time?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
I don't mean that with laughter, it's just so.
Oh, that's fine. And I don't mean to soft sell it, I just...
It should have been as intense as it is, this project. It just,
Sure.
lots of things happen to it's great what it is.
All right. Anything else that's resting on your mind as you sit here that we've not thought to ask about? No, we've asked a whole lot, and again, I appreciate your candor to us. Anything else that you want to kind of tell us about that, hey, they just need to know this about me that's going to affect whether or not they should consider me as a juror?
I think we are the idea of all of us as collective adults, the responsibility for children. It's got to make me kind of weird because I don't have any.
Okay. It's okay.
But, yeah, I've probably got 8, 10 children lost in my life.
Right.
That's what we do. That's our job. So that's one reason I have such a hard time with like this happening.
Sure.
Everyone has a hard time with this happening.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But I was so stressed out the other day, I hired Uber to take me to the show house and back.
Okay.
And there was no cocktail involved. It's just, I can't drive a car right now. I'm so stressed out. So I understand.
About this case you're talking about? Or it's just not about your showing?
And the show.
I got you.
Coming together.
Very good.
I was like, I should not go to street driving. That's
Okay.
how upset I am.
Very good.
But, so, it's just being responsible.
Okay. All right. Give me just a minute.
Sorry.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm going to excuse you, and the bells will take you and give you your next directions. Thank you. All right, anything that needs to be done before we retire for the day? Defense?
I don't think there's anything that we need to do. I would like to, if we could, approach the court about some scheduling for Thursday.
Okay.
30.